He said yes 4 times. Each time the judge asked if he had killed one of them, he simply said yes. No tears, no hesitation, no remorse. Just yes. The families were in that courtroom. They heard it. And the man who took everything from them didn't even flinch. But here's what makes Bryan Kohberger different from most killers. He didn't just study murder. He dedicated his entire academic career to understanding it. He wrote papers about criminal behavior. He taught students about forensic evidence. He knew exactly how investigators think. And yet, he still got caught. This is the story of 4 students who went to sleep on a Saturday night and never woke up. Of a killer who thought he was untouchable. And of the one detail, so small, so overlooked, that brought him down. This is the King Road murders. And this is Beyond the Case.
To understand what happened inside that house, you first need to know who lived there. 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho. A white 2-story house near the University of Idaho campus. The kind of place that's always full of noise, laughter, and the kind of energy that only exists when you're young and free, and convinced that nothing bad can ever happen to you. 5 young women lived there. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen had been best friends since 6th grade. Their teachers used to call them by both names at once, Kaylee and Madison, like they were a single person. They had planned since they were teenagers to go to the same university, join the same sorority, and live together. And they did exactly that. Xana Kernodle had joined them later. Originally from Avondale, Arizona, she had become close friends with both Kaylee and Madison through their shared sorority, Pi Beta Phi. She also worked at the same place as Madison, which meant the 3 of them were together constantly, at home, at work, at parties. Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funky completed the group, turning the house into a place where someone was always around, always laughing, always planning the next night out. And then there was Ethan Chapin, 20 years old, same age as Xana, her boyfriend. He wasn't a roommate officially, but he was there so often he might as well have been. By all accounts, what they had was serious, the kind of relationship people notice. On the night of November 12th, 2022, all 6 of them were in that house. None of them had any reason to be afraid.
The day had started like any other Saturday in a college town. Between 10 and 11 in the morning, the housemates grabbed food together at Taco Bell, then came home, napped, and started getting ready for the night ahead. Xana and Ethan went to a party hosted by his fraternity, Sigma Chi. Kaylee and Madison headed to a bar called the Corner Club in downtown Moscow. Later that night, after leaving the bar, the 2 girls walked around with a guy named Adam, a local server they knew. Then they stopped at a food truck, ordered something to eat, and finally headed home. By around 2 a.m., everyone was back at the house. Ethan stayed over with Xana. The others went to their rooms. At 4 a.m., Xana ordered food delivery. One last moment of normalcy before everything changed. Dylan was starting to fall asleep when she heard something. Noise. Movement. At that hour, it wasn't unusual. 6 young people in a house. Someone was always still awake. But something felt off. She cracked her bedroom door open to see what was happening. What she saw would stay with her forever. A figure moving through the house. A man she didn't recognize. The only detail she could make out clearly: bushy eyebrows. He looked at her as he passed. He didn't stop. He walked to the sliding glass door in the kitchen, stepped outside, and disappeared into the dark. Dylan locked her door. She didn't move. She didn't scream. Her body went into what she would later describe as a frozen state, a trauma response that made it impossible to act, impossible to think clearly. She texted her housemates. Bethany responded. The two of them stayed locked in their rooms, in silence, waiting for morning. They didn't know yet that 4 of the people they lived with were already dead.
When police arrived at 1122 King Road, just before noon on November 13th, they were not prepared for what they found. 4 bodies, 2 on the first floor, 2 on the third. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen were found together in Madison's bed, under a pink blanket, now soaked through with blood. They had been stabbed repeatedly while they slept. On the floor above, Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin were found in Xana's room. Ethan was still in her bed. Xana was on the floor, in her underwear and a gray sweatshirt, her body covered in blood. The violence of the attack was beyond anything investigators had seen in that town in years. Blood had splattered across the walls, the floors, the victims' belongings. It had pooled around their bodies. One victim's face was so badly damaged, she was almost unrecognizable. Xana had received more than 50 stab wounds. Many of them were defensive injuries, deep cuts on her hands, between her thumb and index finger, across her palms. She had fought back, hard, until she couldn't anymore. Ethan had been stabbed beneath his left collarbone, a single strike that severed his subclavian vein, his subclavian artery, and his jugular vein. He likely died within minutes. Madison suffered fatal lacerations to her lungs and liver. Kaylee was stabbed more than 20 times. Wounds to her liver, her lungs, her brain.
No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. The sliding kitchen door had been left open. On Madison's bed, next to her body, investigators found something that would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. A tan leather K-bar knife sheath. Dylan and Bethany had not been touched. Kaylee's dog Murphy was found alive, locked in her bedroom on the second floor. 4 people were dead. 2 had survived. And whoever had done this had walked out the same door he came in, leaving almost nothing behind. Almost.
The pressure on law enforcement was immediate and enormous. Moscow, Idaho had not seen a murder since 2015. Now 4 students were dead, in the same house, in the same night, with no forced entry, no obvious suspect, and no clear motive. The university was in panic. Students were afraid to sleep. Parents were pulling their kids out of school. 3 agencies joined forces: the Moscow Police Department, the Idaho State Police, and the Latah County Sheriff's Office. Nearly 130 law enforcement officers were assigned to the case. The first person of interest was Jack Ducour, Kaylee's ex-boyfriend. They had dated for 5 years before she ended things just 3 weeks before the murders. In the hours before the killings, between 2:26 and 2:52 a.m., Kaylee had tried to call Jack multiple times. Madison had called him 3 times as well.
Online, it didn't take long for people to decide he was guilty. The harassment was relentless. Police had to intervene publicly multiple times to ask people to stop. Kaylee's own family defended him completely, saying they knew in their hearts he had nothing to do with it. His phone records cleared him quickly. So did Adam, the server who had been with Kaylee and Madison earlier that night. But investigators had something to work with. Dylan had seen the intruder. A man. Bushy eyebrows. That was almost all she could give them. But it was a start. On November 19th, police asked the public to submit any video footage taken near the house that night. Within weeks, they had received over 2,600 emails, 2,700 phone calls, and 1,000 digital submissions. And then came the first real break. A white 5th-generation Hyundai Elantra had been captured on surveillance cameras near the house around the time of the murders. It was seen driving toward 1122 King Road. Then, past it. 3 times between 3:29 a.m., then a 4th time at 4:04 a.m. And at 4:20 a.m., just 16 minutes after that last pass, it was filmed leaving the area at speed. At the same moment, Murphy started barking. But the most important piece of evidence wasn't the car. It was the knife sheath. DNA found on the tan K-bar sheath recovered from Madison's bed didn't match any of the victims. Investigators ran it through a public genealogy database and found a partial match to a man living in Pennsylvania. They didn't arrest him immediately. Instead, they drove to Pennsylvania and quietly went through his trash. The DNA confirmed it. The man they were looking for was Bryan Christopher Kohberger, 28 years old, a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, just 10 minutes from Moscow, Idaho. A man who had spent years studying how killers think was now their prime suspect. Bryan Kohberger didn't appear out of nowhere. Looking back at his life, the signs were there, long before November 13th, 2022. In high school, Bryan struggled. He was significantly overweight, over 300 pounds, and was bullied relentlessly. He enrolled in a law enforcement program at a technical high school, training to become a police officer or firefighter. But between his 2nd and 3rd year, multiple female students filed complaints against him. After an investigation by the school administration, he was removed from the program and transferred to HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. He never came back for his final year. He finished school online. At just 17, he was already writing things online that raised serious concerns.
On a discussion forum called Tapatalk, he wrote, "Nothing I do brings me pleasure. I am empty. I have no opinions, no emotions, nothing." Then came the transformation. Between his junior and senior year of high school, Bryan lost between 100 and 130 pounds. The weight loss was so extreme, it required hospitalization for an eating disorder and surgery to remove excess skin.
But the physical transformation came with a personality shift that alarmed everyone around him. He became aggressive, confrontational. He developed a heroin addiction. A former classmate recalls being manipulated by Bryan into driving him to buy drugs. He dominated his younger brother physically, repeatedly pretending to strangle him for no reason. He had what people around him described as a visceral need to prove he was smarter and stronger than everyone else. In 2014, at 19, he was arrested for allegedly stealing his sister's phone, an incident linked to his addiction. He entered a diversion program for first-time offenders, and his record was eventually cleared. By 2016, according to friends, he had gotten clean and refocused on his studies. He pursued a degree, then a master's, then a PhD, all in criminal justice and criminology. But his interest in crime wasn't academic curiosity. Former classmates recalled him conducting a deeply unsettling research project, interviewing convicted criminals and asking them questions like, "Why did you choose that victim? How did you approach them before acting? How did you leave the crime scene afterward?" Questions that, in retrospect, sound less like a student assignment and more like someone taking notes. At Washington State University, where he worked as a teaching assistant, faculty members grew concerned about his conduct. He was warned multiple times. He ignored every warning. On December 19th, 2022, 6 weeks after the murders, the university formally terminated his employment for, and I quote, "failure to meet professional conduct standards in interactions with faculty." A former colleague described him as highly intelligent, but deeply egotistical, someone who tried to use his status to interact inappropriately with female students. The same colleague told investigators he had noticed suspicious injuries on Bryan in October and November 2022. A large scratch on his face that looked like fingernail marks and wounds on his knuckles on 2 separate occasions. When asked, Bryan said he'd been in a car accident. This was the man police were now closing in on. Surveillance of the Kohberger family home. In Monroe County, Pennsylvania, began on December 27th. What investigators observed over the next 4 days only strengthened their case. Bryan was seen repeatedly placing bags in a neighbor's trash while wearing surgical gloves. He meticulously cleaned his car with the kind of precision that only makes sense if you have something to hide. And his car? A white Hyundai Elantra, 5th generation. The exact model police had been publicly searching for. There's one detail worth mentioning here. On December 15th, while driving back to Pennsylvania with his father, Bryan was pulled over twice within 9 minutes. Once for speeding, once for following another vehicle too closely. Neither officer knew about the Idaho investigation. Neither knew about the car they were looking for. Both let him go with a verbal warning. He had no idea how close he'd come. On December 30th,
2022. At approximately
3 a.m., an FBI SWAT team and Pennsylvania State Police arrested Bryan Kohberger at his parents' home. According to his attorney, he and his family were cooperative when officers knocked on the door.
Hours later, Bryan was interviewed by investigators. He sat down calmly, asked about his studies, talked about his PhD program. He behaved, by all accounts, like a man with nothing to hide. Until the moment investigators told him why he was really there. The moment the word murders was spoken, Bryan Kohberger went completely silent. He asked for his lawyer. The interview was over. His phone data told the rest of the story. Between June and November 2022, his phone had connected to a cell tower near 1122 King Road at least a dozen times, almost always late at night or in the early hours of the morning. After November 13th, those visits stopped completely. On the night of the murders, his phone went dark between 2:47 and 4:48 a.m., exactly the window in which the killings took place. 5 hours after the murders, he drove past the house. And when police publicly announced they were searching for a white Hyundai Elantra on December 7th, Bryan panicked. His search history showed him looking up words like psychopath, paranoia, and wiretapping. He read news articles about the investigation. He visited the Moscow Police Department's official website. And within 15 minutes of doing all of that, he went online and bought a new car. On July 2nd, 2025, Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilty to all charges, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary, in exchange for 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 10 years for the burglary charge. He avoided the death penalty. When Judge Stephen Hippler asked him directly if he had killed each of the 4 victims, Bryan answered the same way every time.
Yes. 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 No emotion. No explanation. Just yes. On July 23rd, 2025, he was formally sentenced. As Dylan read her victim impact statement in open court, Bryan Kohberger sat completely still, unmoved. To this day, no motive has ever been established. No personal connection between Bryan and the victims has been confirmed. No explanation has ever been given for why he chose that house, those 4 people, that night. The man who spent his career studying why killers do what they do has never once explained why he did what he did. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. 4 students went to sleep on a Saturday night in a quiet college town. By the time the sun came up, they were gone. And the man responsible had been living 10 minutes away the entire time, studying crime, teaching students, building a career, while their families were left with nothing but questions. Some of those questions have now been answered. But the most important one, why, may never be.
If you have theories, I want to hear them. Drop them in the comments below. Let's talk about this case together, with respect for the victims and respect for each other. I'm Beyond the Case, and I'll see you